Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Peter Kafka. I'm a chief correspondent here at Business Insider, focused on media and tech. And this week, I, along with lots of you, have been obsessed with a giant story, the battle for the future of Warner Brothers Discovery. If you've been following this, you know the iconic movie and TV studio conglomerate accepted an offer from Netflix to buy most of the company, minus its cable channels. Not so fast, says Paramount. They have put in their own bid to buy the whole thing. They said they're not going to go away. Yesterday, the Warner Brothers board came out and said, nope, we still think our shareholders should sell to Netflix. So my colleague, Nathan McAlone, who runs BI's media business team, and I thought this would be a good time to break down what could happen next and to answer any questions you might have about the deal. If you want to join this conversation, this is your chance. Drop your questions in the comments wherever you're watching this, and we'll try to answer them. Oh, I should turn to Nathan here. Nathan, let's start with the actual news that broke yesterday. What did the Warner Brothers board say, and was it a surprise?
Yes, so the two things that they really emphasized in rejecting Paramount's bid was that the Netflix deal provided one, more certain value, and two, better values. So two of those things are combining to make them not like Paramount. Basically, the first one, the more certain value, they don't believe that Larry Ellison's billions are totally backstopping the deal.
Larry Ellison is?
Oh yes, Oracle billionaire Larry Ellison, who is David Ellison's father. David Ellison is the CEO of Paramount.
And the reason he's the CEO of Paramount is because his father,
yes,
one of the richest men in the world, helped him basically buy Paramount earlier this year.
Exactly. And now he really wants to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, but the Warner Brothers board is worried because the money that's backstopping it is in a revocable trust. And they're worried that that could somehow change, and they want Larry Ellison to give a personal commitment to it. So that's the first, more certain value. The second part, the superior value, kind of comes down to how the deals value the networks that you just noted are not being bought by Netflix, but want to be bought by Paramount. So
Paramount wants to buy the entire thing.
Exactly.
Netflix just says, give us the movie and TV studio and HBO. We're good. We don't need CNN. We don't need the Discovery Network, Food Network, etc.
Exactly. And the big fight is over how much those crappy networks, as people might uncharitably say, are actually worth. Paramount, who wants to buy them, unsurprisingly says they're worth very little. Netflix says they're worth a lot. And so those two factors are really what Warner Brothers pointed to.
And you didn't misspeak there, right? You're saying Paramount wants to buy the entire thing, but they're also saying the thing we want to buy has less value than Netflix, which doesn't want to buy the whole thing. So this is some negotiation and sort of public posturing that goes along with a deal this size. And it's a huge deal, right? We're talking $73 billion is the Netflix offer. Paramount's bigger than that because they're buying the whole thing.
Yes, exactly. Totally. A little gamesmanship here. And Peter, what do you think actually is the biggest concern that Warner Brothers has? Do you have a sense of that?
It's a pretty good question, because one of the reasons that many of us thought that Paramount would win this bidding war is they were just going to say, look, Warner Brothers Discovery, you guys are talking about splitting up the company, and there's a good company and a bad company, and there's different value, but that's going to be complicated. We're going to make it simple. We're going to give you $30 a share, whatever the offer is. We're going to buy the whole thing, done and dusted. And like you said, Warner Brothers is saying, well, no, actually, your offer is more complicated than it sounds. There's a bunch of, in addition to this issue of the revocable trust, you've got a bunch of partners, including Gulf states. That's not necessarily a problem, but it's just more complicated and hairy. And we think actually the Netflix deal, which is a bunch of cash, some stock, and then you guys are funding this with some debt, that's cleaner and we can get this done more quickly. Paramount is suggesting that there's something untoward about this, that maybe Warner Brothers never wanted to sell to Paramount. I don't really buy that conspiracy theory. The people who run Warner Brothers Discovery know that they are responsible for public shareholders. Their job is to get the highest value, and I think that who will win in the end is whoever can pony up the most cash.
So that brings us to the next thing, which is what happens next. Basically, Paramount reiterated its hostile bid. So no one has raised their price yet. But in the next couple weeks, the next couple days, we could see either Netflix and or Paramount raise the offer. David Ellison has suggested that he knows that he might have to sweeten the deal.
Yep.
And Netflix has kind of a little bit indicated that they might be willing to sweeten the deal too, although not officially, and no one said anything. How badly do you think they want it? Where do you expect this to go on price, if you have a sense?
No sense on price, because you know, couple months ago, smart people were like, this is $24 gets the deal done. Now we're up to $30 a share. I think Paramount / the Ellisons need this deal more. They are more likely to pay more. They are a public company, but they're not really a public company. They're essentially controlled by the Ellisons. Netflix is a real public company. Its share price has been going down recently. Paramount people keep noticing that, which suggests that Netflix investors aren't super comfortable with what they're already committed to spend. So they probably have less wiggle room in terms of how high they can go.
Yeah, but the question, I guess, on the Paramount side is, yeah, they might need it more, but how much does Larry Ellison need it more? How much does he want to put his own money in the mix, if that really comes down to it? And then we have a question from our LinkedIn audience. I don't know if you wanted to take a look at that to read that, Peter?
Sure, it is from Drew, who wants to know, well, his basically a suggestion. He says, Netflix is the first service I would cancel right now, so I can see why they'd want to bolster their portfolio. I guess we don't have Drew here to ask whether he's a Paramount subscriber as well, if we're really measuring those equally. But do you think, so he's suggesting, look, Netflix, this is a thing you hear a lot. Netflix actually doesn't have good stuff, which is kind of weird because they have hundreds of millions of subscribers who presumably think there's something worth watching. But there is sort of an overall question of whether Netflix is doing this from a position of strength. They have already essentially won the streaming wars, or whether this is Netflix sort of tacitly acknowledging, actually, we're not growing as fast as we like. Actually, there's some things we still haven't figured out, and maybe we actually do need this deal more than we're letting on.
Yeah, I think that there's a really interesting part of that where Netflix has won, in some ways, the streaming wars. They have the most paid subscribers by a long shot. However, they're not even the biggest on TV. That would actually be YouTube. So they're losing, in a sense, sometime share to social media. And they definitely haven't figured out completely how to make these really iconic franchises in the same way that Warner Brothers, which is this storied Hollywood institution, they have this deep library. They have DC comics movies. They have Harry Potter. Netflix would love that. And it kind of fits into a pattern that we've been seeing of Netflix really trying to reach for things that maybe it's not as good at. They've been trying games, which hasn't necessarily been that successful, but they've also been signing a bunch of podcast deals in recent weeks to try to bring that to the forefront. So there does seem to be some indication on their end that there are areas that they want to expand into, that they can't just do movie and TV, that maybe they've topped out as far as how they can grow that from the way that they've done it right now. And maybe Warner Brothers is some sort of unlock for them regarding these kind of like marquee franchises.
I will say that, everyone says Netflix can't make hits. They have Stranger Things. That's a giant hit. What's the one where you have to dance for your life or you get killed?
Squid Game.
Squid Games, right? They are making franchises, and none of the other major studios are making new franchises for the most part. They're going back and mining their old stuff.
Yes. That's a really good point.
That's the current Warner Brothers plan is,
yes.
Hey, we have Superman, we have Batman, we're going to make more of those movies.
Yeah. And now we have another comment here. This is from LinkedIn from Anthony in Baltimore. He calls the deal with Netflix another AOL Time Warner style merger fiasco in the making. Netflix is better off sticking with what it's good at and picking over these Hollywood giants' assets once they depreciate even further. Netflix does not have the management experience or the integration track record to take on this kind of reclamation project. One thing, to be fair, they haven't tried this kind of integration project before. They've never done a deal of this size. But what do you think of that, Peter?
It's a pretty good argument, and one of the reasons it's a pretty good argument is the Netflix folks would say this in the past when you would ask a Netflix executive, hey, are you interested in bidding on this or buying that? And they not only have they not bought anything of this size, they barely bought anything at all. They bought essentially the Roald Dahl catalog for a couple $1 billion. And their answer in the past has been, why should we go buy X or Y? We'll take the money we could have spent on that and make things like Stranger Things, make new shows. That's the better approach. Why would we want to load ourselves down with this legacy deal? On top of that, when companies like Disney and Fox essentially merged, the Paramount Skydance deal, Time Warner has gone through all these permutations. When I talk to Netflix executives in the past, they said this is great for us. In theory, our competitors are bulking up. What's really happening is they're essentially taking years of merging themselves and figuring out who owns what, and they're going to sort of tread water. We get to go ahead and progress. Now they're the people who are going to be, they're people who are going to be stuck in the water for a while. They're going to be stuck in the water trying to get this deal done. There'll be a long antitrust review. If they get it done, then they have to go merge this stuff. It will be messy. And now they are signing on and saying, yeah, we would like this mess, which is interesting.
Yeah, and even some of the smaller acquisitions they've made in the video game space have not necessarily done that well. They shut a couple of them down, so it's not like they have an amazing track record even in the small M&A that they've done. And now looking at this, taking a step back, fundamentally, we know that the difference between the two offers is one is for the entirety of the company, like you said, and one is just for the Netflix. For Netflix, it's just for the
movie studio.
Exactly. So, if Netflix wins, what do you think will happen to CNN, other cable channels?
The plan, if Netflix wins, is the plan that Warner Brothers has already set up, which is we have these cable channels, CNN, Discovery, etc. We're going to spin those off into a separate company. Mechanically, what that means is if you own shares in Warner Brothers Discovery now, you're going to get shares of this new company. It's worth something. Paramount's essentially saying that's worth $10 billion.
Right.
Warner Brothers is saying it's 25. It's some number that will be a publicly traded company, and then who knows what happens to it after that. There's a good chance that individuals could come and say, or individual networks could be spun out of that, like a CNN. There's also a lot of speculation that, all right, you take that company of spun off cable networks and you merge it with Versant, which is Comcast's spun off company of cable networks. And there's more, right? A&E is ditching theirs. There's a bunch of cable networks that their media owners don't want to own anymore, and there's this theory that, well, no one really wants to own them, but if you combine them all together, then you'd have something of value.
Yeah, and we actually got a very specific question that relates to this as well. Denzel asks, if Paramount Skydance were to succeed in acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery, what would be the likely outcome for legacy Viacom networks such as MTV, BET, and Nickelodeon in terms of operations and headquarters specifically? Is it realistic that those brands could be consolidated into WBD's existing campus in Atlanta, or would Paramount likely keep operations decentralized?
That is very specific.
Very specific.
And I can't really tell you if CNN is going to continue to work in Atlanta, but you can look at what Paramount is doing right now post David Ellison's ownership. They exist in New York and they exist in LA, and Paramount essentially said, we don't really need most people in New York, so everyone needs to come work for us in LA, and if you don't want to come work for us in LA and come to the office, you can leave. We'll give you a severance package. Quite clear, right? We are a LA-based company and we need many fewer people. So however we get to that, that's where we want to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then we have another question here. This one is from Neil. And he says, overall, who do you think would be a better buyer for these assets in order to maintain the overall health of the film and TV ecosystem, given competing demands for consumer time for creator content, gaming, sports, social media, and the like? You have any quick thoughts on that?
Well, we were talking about this before, right? I mean, I think this is sort of getting at one of the things you're hearing a lot out of Hollywood, which is, hey, what's going to happen to the business of putting movies in theaters? Which is something Netflix for a long time has said they're not very interested in. That's freaking people out in Hollywood with good reason. Paramount, meanwhile, said, we love movies, we love theaters, we're going to make more than ever. But when you really step back, they're all going to be in the same boat. No matter who wins it, they're going to be competing with everything for your time. Streaming video on LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube, etc. I don't think you can look at either one and say this one is better equipped to compete with everything that is out there competing for consumers' time, advertisers' dollars, subscription dollars. Don't know.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And even if we just look at the movie piece, it's interesting because on one hand, if Netflix buys it, all of a sudden you have Netflix owning Warner Brothers, big movie studio, iconic Hollywood player. Maybe they're now subtly invested in the movie theater business. It would be nice. Hollywood would love for Netflix to feel like they have a stake in
This is the new revised Netflix talking point?
Yes.
That they've sort of getting to, because on the day they announced the deal, they said, we're still going to stay in the theatrical business and putting stuff in theaters. We're definitely going to do that. That said, we think this is a kind of a lousy business, and this idea of windowing stuff is kind of crummy, and we're going to eventually move on from that. And they have tightened up that messaging a bit to say, no, now we didn't like the movie business because we weren't in the movie business.
Yeah.
Now we're in it.
Right.
But they're not. It's very hard. I mean, Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, until recently was running it, said all the time, look, there's always new things competing for time and attention, and things that people like to do today they might not like to do in the future. He would point out that books were really well read in the past. Opera was something people did in the mainstream. I went to my first opera last week. It is not a mainstream experience. So things that are still, just because people are doing them today doesn't mean we're going to do them in the future. And whether Netflix or Paramount owns this asset doesn't ensure that viability.
Right. Reed Hastings also, I remember, once talked about maybe there could be a pill that you would take, and that could also be your entertainment. I don't know how he feels about that now. But yeah, as you were saying, a lot of skepticism about Netflix's interest in the movie theater business. But then on the other hand, if Paramount buys it, all of a sudden you have combining these two iconic Hollywood studios, and that is going to lead to probably short-term a lot more layoffs for that. So
that is part of the Netflix pitch as well, which is we will fire fewer people if we buy Warner Brothers than Paramount will.
Yeah, specifically they're saying that they're targeting $2 to $3 billion in synergies, which often translates into job cuts.
Always.
Well, yes, always, but I just meant the however much of that, probably a lot. And then for the on the Paramount side, they're saying at least $6 billion. So
on top of the $3 billion they've already promised to take out of Paramount. So they're saying Paramount is now saying they're going to take $9 billion of cost out of their company. Where do you think those costs are coming from? They're not going to save on paper clips.
And then also, I mean, whoever wins, of course, it's just consolidation. You're going to have one fewer buyer no matter what for your TV and film projects. So there's going to be that impact on Hollywood too. Another question, a big one that you've looked into a lot, is the role potentially of Donald Trump in this process, or other outside investors, like Middle East money that was, at least at one point, a part of the Paramount bid. Can you just give us an update on the Trump of it all, and also any insights into the Middle Eastern financing?
So the Trump of it all, Donald Trump was quite clear. He says the decision is going to come through me. It's kind of Donald Trump's fantasy, right? That you've got these people who all want his attention. In this case, there are two giant media companies. He cares about media, and also Americans care about media. So a lot of people are going to pay attention to this. Donald Trump loves that idea. That's not how it's supposed to work. In theory, there'd be distance between Donald Trump and his Department of Justice. The Department of Justice would, no matter who wins this deal, there's going to be an antitrust review. And a lot of folks believe, even still today, that ultimately Donald Trump will tell Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, I would like Paramount to win, or I would like Netflix to win, and I want you to eventually figure out how to block this deal, likely through a lawsuit. Doesn't mean he can actually block it. Donald Trump pursues lots of things in courts that don't often go his way, but there's still a belief that he might ultimately come down on Paramount's side. That said, he's been making points about how unhappy he is with Paramount's ownership recently. He's a pretty erratic guy. Hard to predict where that's going to happen. The second part you mentioned is this idea of Gulf money, Middle Eastern money, not just money from that part of the world, but money from those governments, from the Saudi government, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, putting in $24 billion in this latest Paramount bid. That's more than double what the Ellisons themselves were supposed to put in. So there was a concern on the Warner Brothers board that would trigger regulatory review. Paramount says, well, that's not an issue anymore because our investors will not ask for anything in return. They're not going to have governance. They're not going to have a vote. They won't be on the board. So what are they getting out of it? I have been surprised there's been less made of that. And there's some sort of theories about why. But to me, it's a pretty meaningful thing to have Gulf money, a meaningful amount of Gulf money, potentially owning a giant American media conglomerate that makes movies, television shows, produces the news via CNN. You would think that would raise eyebrows.
And then we also heard that Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, had dropped out of the deal. He was previously on the Paramount side. Do you have any thoughts about how that could impact things, or just any thoughts on that?
It's interesting because Jared Kushner has this fund, Affinity Partners. Almost all of the money in Affinity Partners comes from the same Gulf states I was just mentioning, so they were kind of double dipping. But when you looked at the filing this week, you saw that comparatively they're putting in next to nothing, $200 million, compared to the $24 billion the Gulf states were putting in directly. So they certainly didn't need that money to make the deal happen. You can draw some fairly logical conclusions that the the Ellisons basically thought that having Donald Trump's son-in-law involved in the deal would help them. Now, for whatever reason, Jared Kushner's saying, I don't need to be in this deal. So maybe that's not so good for the Ellisons.
Yeah, and I've seen people reading into it, perhaps over-reading into it, the potential of that, and combined with Trump's comments about, oh, Ted Sarandos is such a great guy, even though historically he's been so close to the Ellisons. I think a lot of people maybe wrongly assumed it was going to be a slam dunk for the Ellisons, but Trump always a wild card and
not consistent.
Yeah, not
he
consistent,
is inconsistent.
exactly.
All of us, many of us remember the surprising footage of Zohran Mamdani, New York's
he loves a
mayor-elect,
winner. He loves
in
a
the
winner.
White House, smiling and beaming with Donald Trump, who'd been calling him all kinds of terrible names. Now, at least for the moment, they're good pals. That could change. And same thing on these deals.
And then I think that we'll looking to assess the impact for consumers. I know that this deal, whoever buys it, is going to be at least a year. All sorts of hoops to jump through. So there won't be much impact for consumers immediately. But do you have any thoughts on the broader impact on consumers down the line?
I mean, look, there's consolidation. So presumably there will be less choice. Not necessarily bad from the consumers, but doesn't usually work out. Prices will go up, but not necessarily because of consolidation, just because the streamers continue to raise prices along with everyone else. I think, it sort of depends on what thing you really care about at Warner Brothers Discovery. If you really care about the movie business, maybe you feel like, all right, Paramount is committed to making more movies and doing this for a longer time, and that's good, I like that. If you care a lot about HBO, you might look at it and go, Paramount has a streaming service that kind of competes with HBO. It seems like those are going to get mushed together, whereas actually HBO kind of fits better with Netflix. Netflix is a sort of broad-based service. HBO is more of a prestige service. Maybe the sort of core HBO service stays alive that much longer under Netflix ownership.
Yeah, and then the other thing, I feel maybe I'm a little jaded just from the last few years, but I feel like for a long time people have been predicting that eventually the streaming landscape will shake out into 3 or 4 winners. So, I mean, you and I have been reading about this, thinking about this for a long time, and we're certainly not there yet. So it seemed like consolidation was inevitable. It seems like to me just one more step towards maybe that universe happening.
Yes, people like David Zaslav, currently the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, would say, yeah, there's going to be 4 or 5 winners, or 3 or 4 winners, and Netflix is one of the winners. And so we're fighting for the spots 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. I think that's still the world we're looking at, where there's going to be Netflix, probably Amazon, because they seem to have both the money and the desire to be in streaming, and then we're not really sure about who else will have the capacity to stick around. Probably Disney, we're assuming. We don't know what's going to happen to Comcast and their media ambitions. They were sort of getting out of media, then they wanted to actually buy Warner Brothers Discovery themselves, which suggests they want to be in media. It's very confusing, but I still think that conventional wisdom that there's going to be 4 or 5 big, meaningful players a few years from now is probably what we're looking at.
And yeah, were there any other topics that you wanted to throw out there, or any?
I mean, we could talk about this for another hour, but I don't think we have that time. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Nathan, for joining me. We're going to keep covering the story. You can get all the latest details right here on Business Insider.